All right, man, peace. So, brothers, this is going to be volume 1 in a new series that I'm starting called What is the Role of the BOULE NEGRO? And this initial entry is going to be featuring none other than Mr. Shannon Sharpe, the former superstar tight end of the Denver Broncos and later on the Baltimore Ravens, who now styles himself as a gatekeeper to the black community. And the reason why many of these BOULE Negroes want to rate themselves or rank themselves or assign themselves that title is because they know what the financial benefit is going to be when they interact with Caucasian or specifically Caucasian Jew kingmakers, power brokers, movers and shakers, or what have you. He wants to be this generation's Al Sharpton. That's why even he has acknowledged that back during his days as a Denver Bronco, they called him Shannon Sharpton. And he still carries a lot of that energy to this day, being someone who just speaks, has no real answers, tries to rile up the lower levels of the so-called black community, once again without having solutions. But unlike Al Sharpton, Shannon Sharpton refuses to put himself on the front line. At least Al Sharpton puts himself on the front line, or used to. And as I've already stated in other videos about Al Sharpton, he was a federal agent and most likely still is a federal informant. He was linked to the FBI. His job was to snitch on many of the members of the mafia. The reason why he's still alive today is because he's federally protected. Am I saying that that's the case with Shannon Sharpe? No. But he is a BOULE Negro. And for those of you who don't know what BOULE is, spelled B as in boy, O as in Oscar, U as in umbrella, L as in Larry, E as in Edward, that basically is an intermediary between his or her people, that being so-called blacks, and the so-called Caucasian. They act as an advisor or counselor to the king. For those of you brothers who read the scriptures, I believe that it's in Mark, the 15th chapter, round about the 43rd verse, where we're introduced to Joseph of Arimathea, and he's described as a counselor. When you go into the original Greek, it tells us that the word for counselor is bouletes, meaning what? A member of the Sanhedrin, or a senator, i.e. a leader, someone who stands in between the Israelites during that time period, or the Jews during that time period, and the Roman government, meaning the ruling Caucasians during that time, who are known as the quote-unquote children of Esau or Amalek. That's a whole other video for another day. The point being is that the job of the BOULE Negro is to keep the masses of low-level blacks. And when I say low-level, I'm not necessarily talking about intellect, even though that is a major part of it. When I say low-level so-called black people, I'm talking about those of our people who are viewed as being irrelevant, or not having any quote-unquote clout or power, not being a part of the entertainment sphere, which is really just set up to entertain not only us, but the true powers that be. That's why they continue to empower that class of so-called black people. They want them to be the new priests, the athletes, the singers, the rappers, the entertainers, the dancers. They want us to look to those people, that class of quote-unquote Negro, for leadership, because those people are bought and paid for already. And their job is to always keep regular quote-unquote black people with their minds situated on quote-unquote equality, and trolling regular Caucasians who, for the most part, are nothing but white trash. As soon as you start to talk about the quote-unquote Caucasian Jew and culture and real history, the job of the BOULE Negro is to bring you back in line. They are a nuanced version of the house Negro. People don't understand the impact of that concept of the quote-unquote house Negro. They basically were a double agent. Many times the house Negro would infiltrate many of the communications and the deliberations that the slaves would have when they were planning to escape. And the house Negro would act as if they were confederate with those slaves who were planning to escape. But they would run back to master and tell that master, this is what these slaves are planning to do. You better stop it. That was memorialized in the film Django, with the character of Stephen, played by Samuel L. Jackson, oh so well. So many of these cats on TV, on the internet, on social media, people like Van Lathan, Jamel Hill, Shannon Sharpe, their job is to get up in arms when the so-called black man and woman are trying to return back to culture, because it's culturalization that's going to empower us. Please keep in mind that the BOULE Negro has a lot to lose. He or she has a lot to lose if our people are properly calibrated back to culture. They're worried about their check. That's why Shannon Sharpe showed his true colors when he was having that discussion with Skip Bayless about the NBA players forming their own league. All he was going on and on about was how the players were going to lose money. So anyway, as we're going to see here, when he's speaking about Deshaun Jackson, Mr. Shannon Sharpe is going to out himself once again as a BOULE Negro, as a quote-unquote house nigga whose job it is to keep the so-called blacks in line. Unfortunately for him, he has a very diluted and inflated opinion of himself and his role. And it's because on this show, Skip Bayless has basically emasculated himself. He's castrated himself. He shows no manliness, no masculinity whatsoever in these conversations about quote-unquote race. He lets Shannon Sharpe have the whole show, the run of the mill. And that to me is what's hurting many of these segments that revolve around race. So they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
The Eagles announced they will fine Deshaun Jackson after the receiver tweeted a fake Adolf Hitler quote.
Now let's please keep in mind that there is an esoteric aspect to the Deshaun Jackson narrative that I'll be covering in other videos. But for the sake of this conversation right here, I want to concentrate on the Shannon Sharpe angle, because this is very important that brothers grasp this. Both sides, whether it's the quote-unquote conservative Caucasian side or the liberal Caucasian side, they view the so-called heterosexual black man in a very neglectful way. The difference is that the conservative Caucasian side, they don't reckon us at all. They don't acknowledge us at all. On the liberal Caucasian side, they view us like a dog that they saved out of the alleyway. They bring you into their yard, even into their house. They'll feed you the scraps. The black woman, they view as a maid. The maid is above the dog. That is why the liberal black woman's job is to always corral talks about culture. I'm not talking about the sisters out here who are relatively on point. I'm talking about the liberal black woman. Their job is to corral the dog. They interact with the dog. They'll feed him the scraps. But if that dog ever starts to bark at the master, they will kick that dog out of the house, maybe even out of the yard. Maybe if the bark is bad enough or the bite is bad enough, that quote-unquote rejection of Caucasian ideologies, they may put the dog down and put him to sleep. So that is how they look at the heterosexual black male on the liberal side. On the conservative side, they view you as a dog that they're just going to leave in the alleyway. You can eat out of the garbage can in the alleyway. If you approach the conservative Caucasian, they're going to shoot you, no questions asked. So that's why I always state that there is no scenario in which the so-called black man wins if you're going to embrace these Marxist ideologies. The only salvation is through the unity of the spirit, the unity of culture, and returning back to our actual history, that being in the scriptures. That's it. That's what's going to empower the so-called black man. That's what's going to make us stand up like men and look these other nations in their eyes, so that we can work with one another. There's no real unity amongst ourselves. The job of the BOULE Negro is to always make us think that salvation is in unifying with these other races and with these other ideologies and these so-called sexual orientations. That's why they're always trying to group black empowerment with LGBT and feminism, all this nonsense, these things that are destroying the so-called black community. But once again, I'll be covering the Deshaun Jackson esoteric aspect, along with Steven Jackson and why many of these cats are getting caught up, Nick Cannon as well, in another series.
Acknowledged his apology, but also said that Jackson would not remain on the team if he doesn't, quote, support his words with action. So, Shannon, are you surprised by this?
I'm not, Skip, and I said I would be very disappointed and very surprised if they suspended him, if they released him, given that they had laid the precedent of actions like this with the Riley Cooper situation. Now,
Right, but also understand that the situation with Riley Cooper occurred during a time period that was a lot less inflamed than this one. We have to keep that in mind. I'll give Shannon this much credit. He's tried to take a lot of the kick or a lot of the inflammation, the inflammatory aspect away from the Deshaun Jackson storyline. To the best of his ability, he's quote-unquote tried to help Deshaun in his own liberal BOULE Negro way. But at the end of the day, that dog is given a doghouse to play in. And if you come outside of that doghouse, if you come outside of that fenced-in enclosure, the job of the BOULE Negro is to let you know No, at no point in time are you ever supposed to speak about the master of the house. And the master of the house is not just the Caucasian, it's the liberal Caucasian Jew. You understand that? The Marxist liberal Caucasian Jew, that is the master of the house. That's why you cannot say anything about them. And the job of the BOULE Negro is to help the dog, that being the heterosexual black man who is trying to find the truth. The job of the BOULE Negro is to let him know, master's off limits. Don't go near that fence.
Man, the 2020 climate is a lot different than the 2013 climate.
Yep.
And I think the thing is, Skip, but I think they weighed in and looked at it. This is not going to look good, because this is kind of what the Black Lives Matter and this is what people and minorities are fighting for. Say no.
No, it is not. The quote-unquote Black Lives Matter movement is not fighting for the rights of people to be able to express themselves, or for unity, or for any level of equality. The quote-unquote Black Lives Matter movement is fighting for Marxism, cultural Marxism. That means the destruction of the family, the destruction of male leadership, and really the destruction of the so-called black man. But they're using you as their infantry. The so-called black man has been so dumbed down, he actually fights for ideologies that are trying to destroy him. So to me, for Shannon Sharpe to say that, that just confirms that either he's not done his research, or he's willing to immerse himself in this role as the gatekeeper of race in the so-called black community, so deeply entrenched that he doesn't care what their mission statement is. He's just going to make it what he wants it to seem like.
That guy said something and nothing happened. He got fined.
Yep.
Got 5 days off, came back, played well, and got an extension. One guy said something, he gets suspended, he gets released. So I think that played heavily into it, because Skip, because Mr. Lurie, the owner of the team, is Jewish. Howie Roseman, the general manager of the team, they're Jewish.
Right, but what does that mean to be Jewish, Shannon Sharpe? What does that mean? You and I both know that you guys are not allowed to have that type of discussion on your show, because they control your show, which was the point of Deshaun Jackson's attempt at showing what that caption stated, or what that alleged statement was that Hitler made, or that Farrakhan repeated. Whatever the situation was, at the end of the day, that was what he was trying to convey. That the real battle is not with this white trash going back and forth with them. The real battle is looking at the so-called Caucasian Jew and calling them out for their attempts to associate themselves with the people of the book. Is that real? Is that substantive? Is that relevant? Is that something that has concrete evidence? Or should we start to scrutinize that as well? Once again, if you want to know who's in control, focus on who you're not allowed to talk about.
But it hit them differently. Skip, and that's what I tell people all the time. When people that's been offended, let's just say, take for me, someone says something that's offensive to me or my race of people, and someone outside says, well, move on. It wasn't that. That's not your call.
Shannon Sharpe, I have news for you, bro. Many times the truth offends people. And if you're offended, oh well. If somebody says 1 + 1 = 2 and you say, I'm offended by that, are they supposed to stop saying it because that offends you? If someone says the sky is blue and the sun is yellow and that offends you, should they stop saying that? We're living in an offense culture. So you have to expect people to become defensive if you're offended by everything. They're going to start to recalibrate how they express themselves, but it's not going to change how they actually feel inside based on what they know. That's what the quote-unquote cancel culture is all about. It's just mob culture. But nobody has cancel culture like these so-called Caucasian Jews. Look at what they just did to Nick Cannon. And don't get it twisted, Nick Cannon was stupid for saying what he said, because you cannot drink of the cup of the Lord and of the cup of devils. You cannot eat off the table of the Lord and off the table of devils at the same time. You're confederate with those same people that now you're trying to expose. So you're foolish for saying what you said. It's not really Nick Cannon's job to say things like that, nor is it Deshaun Jackson's job. So that makes me suspect that there's an esoteric component to this, where actually this is a contrived event where they wanted these quote-unquote celebrity people to say what they said so that boundaries could be established for the so-called black man, to let them know this is what's going to happen to you if you bring up the Jewish component. We're going to cancel you. You can go back and forth with the other goyim all day. You can argue with the other nations. You can riot with them. You can kill them, and they can kill you. But do not talk about us, or we're going to have to take you for reprogramming, i.e., let's teach you about the Holocaust. That's all that's going to occur. So Shannon Sharpe is trying to use this nonsense about how there should be reciprocity and how people are offended. The so-called black man and woman control 0.1% or 0.01% maybe of the economy. That's the level of control that we have over the economy. I promise you that the so-called Caucasian Jews, they control much more of the economy than us. So the real question is, why are you so embarrassed when people say that you control the media and control the banks? You just do, and that's okay. You should celebrate that. But the reason why you don't is because people are going to start to get closer to finding the real trail that leads to the actual problem. Because if the same people control the banking, also control the real estate, also control the media, also control the entertainment industry, that's the same faction that controls your mind. So if we're trying to escape this mind control, and they're the same group of people that are controlling your mind, what must we do? We have to encounter those people. Not necessarily in a violent way, but just in an ideological way. We have to have that quote-unquote conversation. See, the BOULE NEGRO wants to keep your mind focused on having that conversation with white trash, people who are not controlling anything. The vast majority of so-called Caucasian people in America today are not descended from quote-unquote slave owners. For the most part, if you want to talk about what their contribution was during the time period of slavery, they're descended from white trash whose job it was to act as overseers over certain black slaves, so-called black slaves. That's talking about the Caucasians who came here or who were brought here themselves, maybe in shackles, from the early 1800s throughout the mid-1800s. Nothing but white trash. Irish, Germans, Poles, all these people, Italians. They didn't own slaves. But they do benefit from this current societal hierarchy. Don't get it twisted. The Caucasian Jew is the highest level Caucasian, and they allow the crumbs to trickle down through the other Caucasian tribes. For example, they allow the Italians to control the mafia, the construction industry, a lot of the restaurants, so on and so forth. They allow the Poles and the Germans and many of these other Caucasian tribes to have their own communities, have their own societies where they can be insulated. Sure. So if we want to go that route of racial disparities, distinctions, and allowances, yeah, we can go there. But the people who are running the whole thing on the highest level, that's without a doubt the Caucasian liberal Jews. They control the banks, they control the media. It's just facts. We can look up who the CEOs are of these various media companies. Also, who's on the board of trustees for these various media companies and for these banks. It's Jewish people, and that's okay. It's not a big deal. Just accept that's who you are.
That's not your call. You don't get to determine how much it should hurt, how soon I should and would move on. Yeah.
So-called black people like Shannon Sharpe are overly infatuated with pain and hurt. They enjoy playing the victim role. I promise you that Shannon Sharpe, in the last 30 years, where he's been famous, been an NFL player, and going all the way back to high school, he's lived a very charmed life. I'd like to know how many unfortunate incidents he's had with the police. I'd like to know how many times he was denied a loan. How many times was he denied the house that he wanted? I'm sure that he'll come back and say, well, it's not just about me, it's about regular blacks. But bro, do you even understand what regular so-called black people go through? I'm sure that you have not lived in the hood for well over 30 years, if you ever lived in the hood, because you lived out in the country even when you were a child. So it sounds a bit to me like delusions of grandeur, like someone who wants to play that, that emancipator role.
But I think the thing is, given they said they can fine him up to one game check, which is $365,000. Had they suspended him for conduct detrimental, that would have been 4 weeks. That would have been about $1.5 million. So for me, Skip, Deshaun made a mistake.
The mistake that he made was that he was speaking about a topic that he was not well versed in or knowledgeable about. When you start talking about history like that, especially Bible history, you better be well versed. You better know what you're talking about. You better know what points you want to hit and why. You better know all of that. So when you start just repeating what other people have said or trying to cite sources that you yourself have not vetted, you're going to set yourself up to be embarrassed. So there's a very good chance that this was a shaming ritual for Mr. Deshaun Jackson to really just promote the documentary that Jeffrey Lurie's coming out with about Hitler.
And why we were the intent. But remember, the intent only matters to the defendant. The person that you offended is equally outraged, whether you meant it or not.
You sound like you went to law school.
Sometimes I feel like I do.
Yep.
Well, you like to act like you have on this television show. That's for damn sure.
Is that I want my community to be outraged.
Well, that's the problem. People like yourself, you always want so-called black people to be outraged. That's not going to help anything. You're supposed to want your community to be informed. When we're informed, that's going to put direction on the quote-unquote outrage. See, there's a big difference between being blinded by anger and being indignant. When you're indignant, you understand why you're upset, and you're going to take the step that you need to take to alleviate the anger that you have. You're going to do it in a rational way. When you're always outraged, that means that you're a powder keg. Everybody has to watch what they say around you, and you're never able to systematically break down what the issue is and solve the problem. So you want everybody to be outraged while you sit up in your mansion in Bel Air, as Skip Bayless would say. Once again, Shannon Sharpe does not live around the people. He does not join any of the struggles that he espouses on TV. He's a character actor. That's what he is. Nothing against the brother. I know that he has delusions of grandeur, and in his heart, he might think that he's sincere. But no, he's not the person for the quote-unquote job. The person for the job is each and every so-called black man getting his mind right and taking control over himself first, then his household, and then we come together and build. But we have to work on ourselves first individually. How do we do that? We have to find out what the framework is for sanity, and that's in the scriptures. That's where it's at. So you have to take your time to meticulously research what it is that you want to be and systematically try to build yourself up. It's not about being outraged or part of outrage culture or quote-unquote cancel culture. That's not going to do shit for our people.
Someone utters the N-word or someone says something offensive to us, we're outraged. So you have to understand.
Well, the cancel culture component of so-called black people are outraged. Those of you liberal Negroes who want the hug and validation from the Caucasian, you're outraged. You can only speak for yourself, Shannon Sharpe. You don't speak for all so-called black people. You speak for yourself and the other woke niggas who are on your social media platforms.
Jewish community.
Yep.
And my thing is in this, and Malcolm, I was a little disappointed in Malcolm Jenkins because he seemed very dismissive. And I didn't like that. Because when someone...
keep the focus on Black Lives Matter.
Yes. The focus was there. D-Jack took it somewhere else.
No, where D-Jack tried to take it, at least allegedly from a two-dimensional perspective, where he tried to take it was to culture implementation, which is the only way that this issue is going to be solved. This issue is not going to be solved through the promotion of quote-unquote equality. There's no such thing as equality. Our people are nowhere close to being equal economically. It's not even close. Once again, we control 0.1% or maybe less than that of this economy. It's not like we're controlling 35%, and if we make little tinkers here or there, we're going to get to 50% or 51%. We control 0.1% of this economy. So whatever these woke niggas have been planning, the marches, the protests, is not working. The issue is from within. It's not about searching out validation from others. So Shannon Sharpe has no idea, as usual, he has no idea what the hell he's talking about when it comes to race. Deshaun Jackson was trying to take us to that next level, once again, from a two-dimensional perspective. He was showing us in the scriptures who we are, because that's what's going to answer a lot of the questions that brothers have about why we're going through the situations that we're going through. It has nothing to do with looking at other races and saying, well, I don't want to offend them because I don't want them to offend me. Like, what type of bullshit is that? The truth is offensive.
You can't get mad. When George Floyd lost his life, when Aubrey died in Brunswick, nobody was mentioning what the Jewish community may or may not have had.
Well, I don't think that Deshaun Jackson's focus was on what the quote-unquote Jewish community has. I think his focus was that so-called black people have to get back to the truth, and there's currently a so-called race of people or so-called nation of people that are living out our birthright. That's what he was trying to convey. These people are living out our birthright because they understand what that means. That means that you're the chosen, you're the elect, you're the exalted ones. That's what he was trying to communicate. So it's not just about being angry forever, Shannon Sharpe. And if those cops who were involved in the ritual with Mr. George Floyd, or the person who was playing George Floyd, if they're arrested, what exactly does that change for so-called black people within their households? Does that make you feel better? Does it make you feel more like a man? Oh, good master finally arrested the cops who killed George. Like, what does that really even fucking mean? What is your plan for the gang members and for the drug dealers who are destroying our communities every fucking day? Oh, you can't say anything about them because those cats, they quote unquote are keeping it real, right? You never hear those dudes get called coons. I wonder why that is. You're never going to hear people like Shannon Sharpe talk about that, but they'll rail all day, every day about the fucking police. Does there need to be some police reform? Absolutely. Does there need to be some accountability by law enforcement? Absolutely. Should it be federalized? Yes. Should there be such a thing as qualified immunity where, you know, they can go from state to state and just pick up where they left off? No. That needs to be abolished. They need to be held accountable for their actions. Their body cams need to be on at all times. There need to be scripts that they read from so that they understand how to handle people. But at the end of the day, being a police officer is a very dangerous job, and they're dealing with very dangerous fucking people. A criminal, whether they're so-called black, white, or other, they operate rather indiscriminately. A so-called black criminal is going to kill a lot of black people. So someone has to deal with that piece of trash. That's why you have the police. The police are just sanitation workers for humans. That's all they are. Now the problem comes in because the police force is corporatized. So therefore they have to write citations and they have to tax people because that's how they get evaluated and assessed. They don't get assessed based on how many crimes they stop. They get assessed based on how many tickets they write, how many citations they give out, how many people they arrest, sometimes for no good reason. That's the real issue, is that the police force is basically a billing agency. So these are the discussions that we need to have. Not about, you know, how happy we're going to be or how sad we're going to be or how offended we are. All that shit is emotional, silly shit for emotional, silly ass niggas.
Own or may not have owned. Nobody mentioned that.
No.
The fact was...
Right, but he mentioned it. So if you're going to have a discussion, we have to have all types of discussions. It's not just about the topics that you're comfortable with, Shannon Sharpe.
Let's get justice. Let's get economic equality.
So Shannon Sharpe, how are you going to get economic equality when you have a certain nation of people who are controlling the banks and controlling the media? That was his point. Lay out your plan point by point for how we're going to get economic equality. Oh, I know. We're going to keep trying to beg rich, affluent, good white men to give us money to get our businesses going, right? Shannon Sharpe, you know what that's called? That's called an investor. It's not the job of billionaire Caucasians or billionaire Caucasian Jews to just give out their money. That's not how their brains work. Their brains work in the aspect of, I'm going to invest in your business. That's why you have that television show, Shark Tank, right? So what you're asking is basically, can we guilt trip you into reparations? And that's just more slave mentality. Shannon Sharpe is all bugged out, but I've been telling you guys this for years. When it comes to race, he's really fucked up in the head.
Let's get a move away from systemic and institutional racism.
Good luck with that quest in getting rid of quote-unquote institutional racism, Shannon Sharpe. Basically, you're asking people to look up at the sky and no longer acknowledge that it's blue so that you feel better about yourself. That's all you're asking. Coming from another entitled athlete, another BOULE member, another intermediary between the Caucasian ruling elite and the black masses. You have no idea what you're really trying to say. Brothers, if you run a business and you're a so-called black man, I would expect that you be trying to hire so-called black people. Institutional racism, quote unquote, could fall under a so-called Caucasian man running a business. Of course, he wants to hire people who look like him. When you see a so-called Caucasian man and he's hiring a bunch of Mexicans, you know why that is? because he expects those Mexicans to be good at things that he has stereotyped them as being good at within his mind, like cooking, delivery, so on and so forth. Same thing with the so-called Asians or Chinese. That's why they hire Hispanics, particularly Mexicans, to work the grill or whatever, because they're expecting them, or at least it's a stereotype in their mind that that's something that these people are good at. In other words, people tend to hire their own. That's what you learn in your culture, to protect your own and to try to make sure that you empower your own. What people like Shannon, Sharpe, and these other liberal Negroes want us to believe is that one day other races are just going to look at the so-called black man and say, I'm going to hire you over someone of my own quote-unquote race or lineage just because. And you know what that's called? That's called, throwing a dog a bone. And that goes back to the analogy that I made about the so-called heterosexual black man, that he's looked at as a dog in this society, on the liberal side and on the conservative side. So it's always going to go back to us and what we're going to do. We have to start our own businesses. We have to train our minds. We have to train ourselves to empower ourselves. That's how it has to go. It's not about begging anymore. It should never have been about begging. The more you beg, the more disrespect you're going to receive on the back end. And that's the bottom line of it.
Nobody mentioned the Jewish community.
Deshaun Jackson did. Deshaun Jackson mentioned the Jewish community. This dude thinks that if he gets on TV and yells, that's going to help him keep his job because he's scared to death of the so-called Jewish man. Look at where his freeze frame. Look at the fear on his damn face. He knows damn well that if he does not make it very clear that he's on the side of the Caucasian Jews, that he's going to get caught up in that firestorm and he's going to lose his job too. That's what this is all about. It's about fear. It's not about truth. Brothers, that's why I say my channel is a pro-truth channel geared towards the so-called black man. This is not a pro-black channel. See, when you're pro-black, you end up like Shannon Sharpe, living in fear. He has to walk a tightrope because he knows who his overlords